In the deepest corners of every Pokemon world, certain creatures appear so rarely that entire lifetimes can pass without anyone seeing them even once. These are the mythical Pokemon, beings wrapped in secrecy and silence, existing just beyond the reach of ordinary understanding. Their stories unfold like whispers carried across centuries, touching only those who seek them with patience and care. Before you settle in, maybe tap subscribe for more calm stories and share where in the world you're watching from tonight, beginning with a creature born not from Earth or ocean, but from the cold void of space itself, where something microscopic drifted quietly through endless darkness until cosmic radiation transformed it into something extraordinary and unknowable. Deoxys began as a simple virus, fragile and unremarkable, floating through the vacuum between stars. Nothing about its early existence suggested transformation or power. It was merely one particle among countless others, drifting without purpose or awareness. Then, without warning, a burst of cosmic radiation struck the virus directly, flooding its structure with energy that should have destroyed it completely. Instead, the opposite occurred. The virus adapted, twisted, and evolved into a conscious being capable of thought, choice, and form. This process happened far from any planet, witnessed by no one, recorded nowhere except in the altered structure of the creature itself. The radiation rewrote its very existence, turning fragile biological code into something flexible and powerful. When scientists later studied Deoxys, they noticed its name derived from deoxyribonucleic acid, the fundamental blueprint that shapes all living organisms. This connection wasn't accidental. Deoxys exists as a living embodiment of genetic potential, carrying within itself the ability to rewrite its own body at will. Its transformation from virus to mythical being remains one of the strangest origin stories in the Pokemon world, a reminder that life can emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. Eventually, Deoxys fell to the Pokemon world inside a meteor, arriving not through choice, but through cosmic chance. The meteor crashed into the planet's surface, and when it cracked open, people discovered something alien waiting inside. This wasn't a creature born from the world they knew. It came from beyond, carrying instincts and behaviors shaped by environments no human or Pokemon had ever experienced. The arrival felt less like a discovery and more like an encounter with something fundamentally other, something that didn't fit neatly into existing categories of understanding. Trainers who eventually met Deoxys described the experience as unsettling and fascinating in equal measure. The creature didn't behave like other Pokemon. It watched, calculated, and shifted its form in response to perceived threats or opportunities. Its intelligence felt cold and precise, as though emotions existed only as distant concepts rather than lived experiences. What makes Deoxys truly unique among mythical Pokemon is its ability to change forms at will. Unlike species that evolve once and remain fixed, Deoxys treats its body as a tool, reshaping it whenever circumstances demand. In its normal form, it appears balanced and calm, with ribbon-like arms that flow gently as if moving through water. Nothing about this shape seems rushed or aggressive. The form suggests observation and patience, a creature comfortable existing without immediate purpose. But when danger appears, Deoxys shifts into attack form, and everything about its body becomes sharper and more dangerous. Its structure narrows, focusing entirely on offensive capability. The same DNA that once drifted peacefully through space now channels destructive psychic energy capable of unleashing Psycho Boost, a move so intense it strains even Deoxys itself. This attack represents pure mental force compressed into a single, overwhelming burst, leaving opponents stunned and Deoxys temporarily weakened from the effort required. Defense form operates as the opposite extreme, transforming Deoxys into something slower, heavier, and nearly impenetrable. Its body thickens, creating layers of protective energy that absorb impacts that would destroy most other Pokémon. In this state, Deoxys becomes a living shield, capable of enduring prolonged assaults without breaking. The shift from attack to defense demonstrates the creature's adaptability, its understanding that survival requires flexibility rather than commitment to a single strategy. Then there is speed form, which strips away everything unnecessary, leaving only the essential framework needed for rapid movement. In this shape, Deoxys becomes almost ghost-like, darting and weaving faster than nearly any other Pokémon. It remembers what it felt like drifting freely through the stars, and for brief moments, it recaptures that sensation of boundless motion. Each form shift isn't an evolution in the traditional sense. It's a choice, a conscious decision made in response to circumstances. Deoxys constantly thinks, reacting to patterns of threats and possibilities that only it perceives. This intelligence sets it apart from many mythical Pokémon, which often operate on instinct or ancient programming. Deoxys learns, adapts, and applies that learning in real time, treating every encounter as data to be processed and incorporated into future decisions. The flexibility extends beyond combat. Deoxys can reconstruct its body almost instantly by rearranging its cellular structure, allowing it to recover from injuries that would permanently damage other creatures. Scientists who studied this ability found it both fascinating and unsettling, realizing that Deoxys existed at the boundary between organic life and something closer to programmable matter. The crystalline organ embedded in Deoxys's chest functions as both brain and heart, gathering information and storing energy simultaneously. When this crystal pulses, Deoxys can communicate telepathically, though what it truly thinks remains largely unknown. Some researchers believe it doesn't experience emotions the way other Pokémon do, focusing instead on survival, observation, and curiosity. Others argue that, like anything living, it must have subtle feelings, fear when threatened and calm when unbothered, and perhaps even a childlike fascination with the world it found itself inhabiting. The truth likely exists somewhere between these interpretations, in a space where consciousness operates according to rules shaped by extraterrestrial origins. Before you drift off, maybe tap subscribe for more gentle videos, and let me know where you're listening from tonight. When trainers first encountered Deoxys in the games, it didn't appear on normal routes or inside ordinary caves. Instead, it existed on distant islands and in unusual events that felt secretive and rare. Birth Island was one such place, a location that required a special ticket obtainable only through limited distribution events. Most players never received the ticket, making the island and its inhabitant inaccessible to the majority of the community. For those who did reach Birth Island, the experience felt strange and isolated. The island itself was small and empty, containing only a single triangular stone at its center. Nothing about the location made immediate sense. No trainers wandered the area, no wild Pokémon appeared in the grass, just silence and the mysterious stone, waiting. When players approached, the stone began to react, slowly drawing Deoxys out of its hidden form. The encounter wasn't filled with dramatic music or explosive effects. Instead, it unfolded quietly, almost cautiously, as the meteor cracked apart to reveal the mythical being inside. This approach to distribution created a sense that Deoxys wasn't meant for everyone. It was a reward for those who attended specific events, who went out of their way to obtain the necessary items, who invested effort into pursuing something hidden. That exclusivity frustrated some players while delighting others, creating a dynamic where Deoxys became a status symbol, proof that someone had been present at the right place and time. The creature's rarity enhanced its mystique, transforming it from just another powerful Pokémon into something genuinely special. Even among those who obtained Deoxys, not everyone understood how to use it effectively. The form-changing mechanic required specific items and knowledge that wasn't immediately obvious, forcing players to experiment or seek information from external sources. This learning process added another layer to the experience, turning Deoxys into a puzzle that rewarded curiosity and persistence. In competitive battling, Deoxys occupied strange territory. Its attack form possessed devastating offensive capabilities, but crumbled under pressure due to poor defensive stats. Its defense form could withstand incredible punishment, but lacked the power to threaten opponents effectively. Speed form moved faster than almost anything else, but struggled to capitalize on that advantage without proper support. Normal form tried to balance these extremes, but often felt outclassed by more specialized options. This versatility paradoxically became a weakness, as trainers needed to commit to a single form before entering battle, losing the flexibility that defined Deoxys in lore. The disconnect between narrative and gameplay created interesting discussions about how game balance necessarily constrained what a Pokémon could do, even when its story suggested limitless potential. Despite these limitations, Deoxys left a lasting impact on how people thought about mythical Pokémon. It demonstrated that not all legendary beings needed to be ancient guardians or divine protectors. Some could be alien, unknowable, and divorced from the world's natural order. This expansion of what mythical creatures could represent opened doors for future designs, showing that there was room in the Pokémon world for beings that didn't fit neatly into established patterns. Deoxys existed as proof that mystery could come from the cosmos rather than from history, that power could emerge from transformation rather than birthright. As the years passed, Deoxys became somewhat more accessible through later distribution events and in-game encounters and remakes. This increased availability diminished its rarity, but also allowed more players to experience its unique mechanics firsthand. The trade-off between exclusivity and accessibility remains an ongoing tension in how mythical Pokémon are handled, with no perfect solution that satisfies everyone. The psychic typing that defines Deoxys connects it to a lineage of extraterrestrial Pokémon in the series, creatures whose powers stem from minds rather than bodies. Psychic abilities in the Pokémon world often represent mental evolution, the development of consciousness to the point where thought itself becomes a tangible force. Deoxys embodies this concept completely, existing as a being whose entire physical form is subordinate to its mental processes. When it shifts shapes, it's doing so through thought, through conscious decision, translated instantly into biological reality. This merging of mind and matter makes Deoxys one of the purest examples of psychic power in the entire franchise, a creature for whom the distinction between thinking and being has essentially dissolved. One detail often overlooked is how Deoxys interacts with other Pokémon when not in battle. In the anime and movies, it's shown as curious rather than hostile, investigating things it doesn't understand with careful attention. This curiosity mirrors its origins as something that adapted to survive, suggesting that learning and observation might be fundamental to its nature. When left undisturbed, Deoxys seems content to simply exist, watching the world and processing information without immediate purpose. This passive state reveals a side of the creature that gameplay doesn't often showcase, a being that's comfortable with stillness and patience, waiting for circumstances that might require action. The contrast between its fearsome combat capabilities and its calm default state creates complexity, suggesting that power doesn't necessarily correlate with aggression or desire for conflict. Deoxys also raises questions about loneliness and belonging. As a unique entity, possibly the only one of its kind, it exists without peers or family. There's no community of Deoxys, no shared culture or history with others like itself. This isolation might not matter to a being whose consciousness developed in the void of space, but it creates a melancholic undercurrent to its existence. Every interaction it has is with creatures fundamentally different from itself, beings who evolved under gravity and atmosphere, who belong to ecosystems and evolutionary trees that Deoxys can never truly be part of. This permanent otherness might explain why it watches rather than engages, why it shifts forms defensively rather than seeking connection. In a world full of relationships and partnerships between trainers and Pokémon, Deoxys stands apart, alone in ways that go beyond simple rarity. The meteorite that carried Deoxys to the Pokémon world serves as a recurring symbol throughout its story. Meteors represent cosmic intrusion, moments when the universe beyond reaches down and touches the world below. They're both destructive and transformative, capable of causing catastrophic damage, while also delivering materials and possibilities that wouldn't otherwise exist. Deoxys embodies this duality perfectly, arriving as both a threat and a marvel, something that challenges understanding while expanding what seems possible. The meteor itself often becomes an object of study in the games, with scientists examining it to understand the energy signatures and radiation patterns that created the mythical Pokémon. These investigations never provide complete answers, leaving Deoxys wrapped in mystery even when physically present and observable. In certain game versions, Deoxys's forms were locked to specific versions, forcing players to trade or transfer if they wanted to experiment with different configurations. This restriction reinforced the idea that Deoxys wasn't meant to be easily understood or fully controlled, that its power came with inherent limitations that even trainers who caught it couldn't completely overcome. Later games removed these restrictions, allowing form changes through meteorites found in-game, but that initial constraint created interesting dynamics, where players had to choose which version of Deoxys they wanted access to, committing to a specific expression of its potential. This choice mirrored Deoxys's own existence as a being defined by adaptation and decision-making, by the selection of one form over others in response to circumstances. The signature move, Psycho Boost, represents Deoxys at its most extreme, channeling all its mental energy into a single devastating attack that leaves it weakened afterward. The move's mechanics, trading future power for immediate impact, perfectly capture the high-risk calculations that define Deoxys's combat style. Using Psycho Boost requires accepting vulnerability in exchange for overwhelming force, trusting that the target will fall before the consequences become critical. This all-or-nothing approach reflects the creature's alien mindset, its willingness to make choices that organic beings evolved for long-term survival might instinctively avoid. The move itself appears as a focused beam of psychic energy, reality bending under the weight of concentrated thought, space distorting briefly before snapping back into place as Deoxys releases the power it gathered. As a mythical Pokémon, Deoxys set precedents that influenced how later generations handled similar creatures. Its event-exclusive nature, its form-changing mechanics, and its extraterrestrial origins all became templates that designers would return to and build upon. Later, mythical Pokémon might be more accessible or more integrated into regional narratives, but many still carry echoes of what Deoxys established, the idea that some creatures exist outside normal progression, that reaching them requires effort and patience, that they represent something beyond ordinary gameplay loops. This legacy makes Deoxys more than just one mythical Pokémon among many. It's a foundational example a proof of concept that helped define what these special creatures could be and how they could function within the broader franchise. The DNA motif that runs through Deoxys's design and lore creates interesting connections to themes of evolution and change that define the entire Pokémon concept. While most Pokémon evolve through experience and growth, Deoxys evolves through choice, through conscious manipulation of its own genetic code. This distinction highlights different philosophies about what development means, whether it's something that happens to you or something you actively direct. For Deoxys, evolution isn't a one-time transformation, but a continuous process, a permanent state of becoming, rather than a journey toward a fixed endpoint. This fluidity makes it conceptually slippery, hard to pin down or fully categorize, which seems entirely appropriate for a being born from chaos and radiation in the depths of space. When players finally catch Deoxys, there's often a moment of uncertainty about what to do with it. Its power is obvious, but its application isn't always clear. Unlike legendary Pokémon that fit straightforward roles as sweepers or walls, Deoxys demands strategy and planning, an understanding of team composition and prediction. Using it effectively requires recognizing when to shift forms, when to leverage its extreme stats, and when to accept its equally extreme weaknesses. This complexity makes it rewarding for experienced players, while potentially frustrating for those expecting a simple power boost. The creature resists easy mastery, maintaining some of its alien inscrutability, even when formally under a trainer's command. This resistance to complete control preserves something essential about Deoxys, a reminder that some things, even when caught, remain fundamentally wild and unknowable. The psychic energy that Deoxys manipulates isn't just a game mechanic, but a window into how consciousness might function for a being like itself. Psychic power in the Pokémon world often correlates with intelligence and awareness, with the ability to perceive and process information beyond normal sensory limits. For Deoxys, these abilities would be magnified by its unique origins and structure, allowing it to perceive patterns and possibilities that other Pokémon miss entirely. This expanded awareness might explain its form-changing behavior, as it sees threats and opportunities developing before they fully manifest, adjusting its configuration preemptively. Living with this kind of perception would be fundamentally different from ordinary existence, a continuous flow of information and calculation that never quite resolves into simplicity or rest. Deoxys rarely appears in herds or groups within the games, reinforcing its solitary nature. The few instances where multiple Deoxys appear happen during special events or battles specifically designed to showcase the form differences. In these moments, seeing multiple copies of the same creature only emphasizes how strange it is, how its existence doesn't quite fit the natural order. Normal Pokémon belong to species with populations, breeding patterns, and ecological niches. Deoxys exists outside these systems, neither predator nor prey, neither common nor part of any identifiable cycle. It simply is, present in the world, but not truly of it, a permanent visitor from elsewhere that never quite settles into belonging. The theoretical implications of Deoxys's existence trouble researchers within the Pokémon world. If one virus can be transformed by radiation into a powerful conscious being, how many other potential Deoxys might be drifting through space, waiting for similar accidents to trigger their evolution? The answer seems to be none, or at least vanishingly few, suggesting that Deoxys's creation required circumstances so specific and unlikely that replicating them would be effectively impossible. This uniqueness makes it precious and troubling in equal measure, a one-of-a-kind being whose very existence defies probability. Scientists who study it walk a line between fascination with what it is and fear of what it might become, knowing that they're dealing with something whose full capabilities remain unmapped and potentially dangerous. The meteorite showers that occasionally occur in the Pokemon world take on new significance in light of Deoxys' story. Every falling star becomes a potential carrier of the unknown, a reminder that space is vast and filled with things that might one day reach the planet below. Most meteorites are just rock and ice, debris from ancient collisions that pose no threat beyond physical impact. But knowing that at least one carried something alive, something transformative, changes how people perceive these cosmic visitors. The sky becomes less a boundary and more a permeable membrane, inadequate protection against whatever might be traveling between the stars. This subtle shift in worldview ripples through how trainers think about legendary and mythical Pokémon, recognizing that some origins lie completely beyond their understanding or control. Deoxys' presence in the Pokémon world also raises questions about ownership and control. When trainers catch legendary Pokémon, they're often partnering with beings that have existed for centuries or millennia, creatures with histories and purposes that preceded human involvement. But Deoxys doesn't have that ancient context. It's simultaneously young and ancient, created recently by cosmic accident, but built from matter older than planets. Catching it doesn't mean inheriting a guardian or partnering with a force of nature. Instead, it means claiming something alien, something that might not fully understand or accept the concept of partnership as it exists between trainers and their Pokémon. This ambiguity creates ethical dimensions that the games rarely address directly, though players often contemplate them when considering what it means to use Deoxys in battle. The way Deoxys communicates or fails to communicate adds another layer to its mystery. While many psychic Pokémon can project emotions or simple thoughts to those around them, Deoxys remains largely silent. Its telepathic abilities seem focused on observation and analysis rather than expression or connection. When it does attempt communication, the results often feel incomplete or alien, as though the concepts it wants to convey don't translate cleanly into forms that human or Pokémon consciousness can process. This communication barrier preserves its otherness, ensuring that even trainers who work closely with Deoxys never quite understand it completely. The relationship remains asymmetric, with Deoxys understanding far more about its trainer than the trainer will ever understand about it. Time affects Deoxys differently than it affects other Pokémon. While aging and deterioration are constants for most living things, Deoxys' ability to restructure itself at the cellular level might allow it to maintain its current state indefinitely. It doesn't grow old so much as it continues, existing in a perpetual present without the gradual decline that eventually claims even the longest-lived creatures. This potential immortality, or at least extreme longevity, means that a Deoxys caught today might be the same individual still existing centuries from now, unchanged and unchanging. The implications are both wonderful and troubling, offering the possibility of permanent companionship while also highlighting the fundamental gap between mortal trainers and a being that transcends normal lifespans. If you're still awake halfway through, maybe subscribe before you drift off and tell me what time it is where you're watching from. The aurora-like energy that sometimes surrounds Deoxys when it changes forms or uses powerful moves resembles the radiation that created it, cosmic energy made visible and harnessed for specific purposes. This visual callback to its origins serves as a constant reminder of where it came from, ensuring that even in moments of integration with the Pokémon world, Deoxys remains visibly marked as something from beyond. The colors shift and pulse with an otherworldly quality, hues that don't quite match anything found in natural light, as though space itself has a signature that persists even when translated into terrestrial environments. Watching these displays Trainers might feel simultaneously awed and unsettled, recognizing beauty in something fundamentally alien, the main body, making consistent study nearly impossible. This elusiveness preserves its status as mythical, ensuring that despite being seen and occasionally caught, it retains an aura of unknowability that separates it from more mundane creatures. The forms that Deoxys can take represent discrete choices from a potentially infinite spectrum of possibilities. The four stable forms trainers recognize might simply be the configurations that proved most useful or sustainable, while countless other shapes remain theoretical, possible, but not manifested. This suggests that Deoxys's true potential exceeds what's been observed, that the creature could develop entirely new forms if circumstances demanded them, reshaping itself in ways no one has witnessed or predicted. The limitation might not be in Deoxys itself, but in the situations it has encountered, which haven't yet required it to explore the full range of its transformative capabilities. This hidden potential makes it genuinely unpredictable, of being the legacy Deoxys established for event-exclusive Pokémon created templates that later mythical creatures would follow, modify, or deliberately subvert. Its distribution through real-world events emphasized that some Pokémon existed beyond the normal game flow, requiring engagement with the broader franchise through merchandise, movies, or special occasions. This approach created communities around shared experiences, with players who attended the same distributions forming connections based on their mutual access to rare content. But it also excluded those who couldn't participate, creating a permanent divide in collections and experiences. The model has evolved significantly since Deoxys first appeared, with more egalitarian distribution methods and time-limited in-game events, replacing some of the geographic and economic barriers that once defined mythical Pokémon access. Deoxys's speed form pushes the boundaries of what velocity means in Pokémon battles, moving so quickly that opponents often can't react before it's already struck and repositioned. This extreme swiftness isn't just about running fast, but represents something closer to teleportation or quantum movement, where Deoxys exists in multiple positions simultaneously before collapsing into a single location. The way it achieves this speed likely involves manipulation of space-time or psychic displacement rather than purely physical movement, allowing it to cover distances that should be impossible given its size and energy expenditure. Watching speed form Deoxys in motion creates optical illusions, after images, and blurs that make it difficult to track where the creature actually is versus where it appears to be. This disorienting effect serves as a defensive mechanism, making it hard to target even for opponents with exceptional accuracy. The cosmic radiation that transformed Deoxys from virus to consciousness might have been a unique wavelength or combination of energies that hasn't been replicated naturally or artificially since. Scientists in the Pokémon world have attempted to recreate the conditions, hoping to understand the transformation process and possibly induce similar changes in other microscopic organisms. These experiments have universally failed, producing only dead cells or unstable mutations that collapse within moments of formation. The failure suggests that Deoxys's creation required more than just specific radiation levels or exposure duration. Perhaps chance played a role, a random configuration of atoms that aligned perfectly in that single moment, creating something that all deliberate attempts cannot reproduce. Or perhaps the original virus possessed properties that made it uniquely suited for transformation, qualities that no laboratory can identify or replicate in test subjects. The relationship between Deoxys and its forms could be compared to different states of matter, with each configuration representing a phase transition rather than a distinct entity. Just as water can be ice, liquid, or vapor while remaining fundamentally water, Deoxys remains itself across all forms, merely expressing different properties depending on environmental pressures and internal choices. This fluidity of self challenges traditional notions of identity and consistency, suggesting that being can be more about potential and pattern than fixed structure. For Deoxys, change isn't loss or abandonment of previous states, but expansion, the continuous accumulation of all configurations it has ever taken, held simultaneously in superposition until circumstances collapse it into one observable form. This quantum-like existence makes it philosophically fascinating, a being that embodies uncertainty and multiplicity as fundamental rather than temporary conditions. In the depths of space where Deoxys originated, time flows differently than it does on planets with gravity and rotation. What seems like a brief journey to Deoxys might have actually spanned millennia, with the virus drifting through timescales that dwarf civilizations. This temporal distortion means Deoxys might perceive duration in ways completely alien to terrestrial consciousness, experiencing events not as sequences, but as simultaneous presence, all moments equally accessible and immediate. If true, this would explain some of its strange behaviors, the way it sometimes seems to react before events occur, or hesitate inexplicably during seemingly urgent situations. It's not confused or slow, just operating on a time frame that doesn't align with how other beings experience causality and progression. Communicating with such consciousness would be nearly impossible, like trying to have a conversation with someone who experiences every moment of their life at once and cannot isolate a single present to focus on. The genetic code that Deoxys manipulates so freely represents the ultimate expression of biological mastery, a level of control over physical form that other Pokémon can only approximate through evolution or held items. This mastery raises questions about consciousness and embodiment that neither science nor philosophy in the Pokémon world can fully address. If Deoxys can change its body at will, maintaining the same consciousness through radically different physical configurations, what does that say about the relationship between mind and form? Are they separate, with consciousness existing independent of physical structure? Or are they deeply intertwined, with each form change actually altering how Deoxys thinks and perceives? The answer likely varies depending on who you ask, with researchers, trainers, and Deoxys itself potentially holding completely different perspectives on the question. The psychic abilities that allow Deoxys to shift forms might also enable it to perceive possible futures, branching timelines where each choice leads to different outcomes. This quantum sight would let it evaluate the consequences of taking attack form versus defense form before actually making the change, selecting the configuration most likely to produce desired results. If Deoxys does possess this ability, then every form change represents a calculated decision based on probabilistic assessment of thousands or millions of potential futures, all computed in the instant before transformation occurs. This level of precognition would make it nearly unbeatable in theory, always choosing the optimal response to any situation. That it can still be defeated suggests either that the ability is imperfect, that the future is too chaotic to predict reliably, or that Deoxys deliberately limits how much it relies on such sight, preferring to engage with the present moment rather than living entirely in calculation and prediction. As darkness deepens and thoughts begin to drift toward sleep, Deoxys remains out there somewhere, perhaps floating in orbit around the planet, perhaps resting in a hidden laboratory, perhaps compressed into its spherical form inside some trainer's pokeball. Whatever its current state, it continues existing as it always has, alien and unknowable, carrying within itself mysteries that may never be fully revealed. Its presence in the world serves as a reminder that space is vast and largely unexplored, that the universe contains wonders and terrors that haven't yet found their way to any planet's surface. In this sense, Deoxys is both a warning and a promise, proof that contact with the truly alien is possible, while demonstrating that such contact might not lead to understanding or integration, but to permanent strangeness that resists all attempts at domestication. The first mythical Pokémon ever distributed to players was Mew, a creature whose biology and behavior seemed designed to perplex anyone who studied it too carefully. Unlike Deoxys, which came from space, Mew supposedly originated on Earth, existing as an ancient ancestor from which all other Pokémon descended. This origin story created immediate contradictions, as fossil records and evolutionary charts didn't support a single common ancestor model. Yet Mew persisted in its role, both in lore and in the genetic structure that researchers observed in its cells. Every DNA sequence found in every Pokémon species appeared somewhere in Mew's genome, suggesting either that it truly was the source of all Pokémon diversity or that it had somehow collected and incorporated genetic material from countless other creatures over immeasurable time. Neither explanation felt entirely satisfying, which seemed appropriate for a creature whose very existence challenged conventional understanding. Mew's appearance suggests innocence and playfulness rather than power or danger. It's small, pink, with large eyes and a long tail that ends in an oval tip. The design conveys friendliness and approachability, making Mew seem more like a companion than a legendary entity. Yet this cute exterior houses abilities that exceed most other Pokémon, including complete mastery of transformation, teleportation, and psychic manipulation. Mew can learn any technical machine move, a trait shared by no other creature except its genetic derivative Mewtwo. This unlimited move pool makes it unpredictable in battle, capable of adapting to any situation by drawing from the complete catalog of learnable techniques. Trainers facing Mew never quite know what to expect, as it might use fire attacks one moment, water moves the next, and then shift to pure psychic assault without warning. The contradiction between Mew's appearance and capabilities creates cognitive dissonance that many find charming. It's difficult to reconcile the adorable pink creature floating peacefully through ancient forests with the being capable of devastating attacks and reality-warping transformations. This duality might be intentional, reflecting how evolution often produces forms that don't advertise their true nature. Creatures that look harmless can carry potent defenses or offensive capabilities, while intimidating appearances sometimes mask gentle dispositions. Mew embodies this principle completely, using cuteness as camouflage while maintaining power that could reshape ecosystems if applied carelessly. The fact that it chooses not to use this power aggressively suggests either a gentle nature or a level of restraint that comes from understanding consequences better than most beings could. Mew's relationship with Mewtwo adds tragic depth to both creatures' stories. Scientists created Mewtwo from Mew's DNA, attempting to engineer a more powerful psychic Pokémon they could control and study. The project succeeded in creating something immensely powerful, but failed completely in the control aspect, as Mewtwo developed its own consciousness, questioned its purpose, and eventually rebelled against its creators. The two creatures represent opposite approaches to existence. Mew embodies natural evolution and playful curiosity, while Mewtwo represents artificial creation and existential angst. Their encounters in various media always carry weight, as they're looking at twisted reflections of themselves, similar enough to recognize kinship, but different enough to highlight what each has lost or never possessed. The transform ability that Mew masters so completely allows it to become perfect physical copies of other Pokémon, mimicking not just appearance, but abilities, moves, and even statistical distributions. This transformation isn't illusion or disguise, but actual cellular reconfiguration. Mew literally becoming whatever it copies for the duration of the effect. The ability raises questions about identity and self, as during transformation, Mew ceases to exist in its original form, replacing itself entirely with something else. When it changes back, it returns to its pink, floating self, but the experience of being something else must leave traces, memories, and sensations from inhabiting a different body with different capabilities. Over time, if Mew has transformed into thousands of different Pokémon, its sense of self might become complex and multifaceted, containing echoes of every form it has ever taken. Mew's distribution through special events created frustration and desire in equal measure among players. Early games contained hints and rumors about Mew, including the famous truck near the SS Anne in Pokémon Red and Blue that supposedly hid access to the creature. These rumors were false, but they demonstrated how desperately players wanted to find Mew, how willing they were to believe that hidden methods existed for encountering it. The truth was simpler and more exclusionary. Mew could only be obtained through official Nintendo events that most players couldn't attend. This created a kind of mythology around the creature, where its rarity enhanced its appeal far beyond what its actual battle capabilities justified. Owning Mew became a status symbol, proof of special access or connections that separated those who had it from those who didn't. The glitches that allowed players to encounter Mew without attending events became legendary in their own right. The most famous, often called the Mew glitch, required a specific sequence of actions involving trainers in particular locations and careful timing of the menu system. Performing the glitch correctly would make Mew appear in the wild, catchable, despite never being intended to spawn naturally. Players who discovered or learned this method could obtain Mew without official distribution, democratizing access in ways that Nintendo hadn't planned for. The glitch's existence and the community knowledge sharing that propagated it represented players taking control of their experience, refusing to accept that some content should remain permanently inaccessible. Whether this represented creative problem solving or circumventing intended game design depends on perspective, but either way, it showed how dedicated communities could find ways around even the most carefully constructed barriers. Mew's association with ancient forests and tropical jungles creates an aesthetic that feels appropriate for a creature representing primordial life. These environments teem with biodiversity and complexity, places where the density of life reaches peaks that make categorizing and understanding individual species nearly impossible. Finding Mew in such settings connects it to abundance and mystery, suggesting that it thrives in places where nature remains largely undisturbed by human interference. The rare sightings reported by trainers often describe Mew appearing briefly in clearings or near ancient trees, observing its surroundings with curious eyes before vanishing in a shimmer of psychic energy. These encounters feel less like battles or confrontations and more like meetings, moments of mutual observation where two forms of consciousness acknowledge each other before returning to their separate paths. The genetic experiments that created Mewtwo took place on Cinnabar Island, where scientists studied Mew samples recovered from ancient ruins in South America. The ruins themselves suggested that Mew had been known and possibly worshipped by ancient civilizations, recognized as something special long before modern Pokémon research began. Carvings depicted a small, cat-like creature with a long tail, accompanied by symbols that suggested divinity or creation. These archaeological findings supported the theory that Mew served as an ancestor species, though they didn't prove it conclusively. Alternative interpretations suggested that ancient people simply revered Mew for its rarity and power, elevating it to mythical status without understanding its true biological role. Either way, the connection between Mew and human history ran deeper than most realized, with the creature appearing in cultural memory long before modern encounters began. The playfulness that defines Mew's personality, as portrayed in anime and games, contrasts sharply with the serious reverence most legendary Pokémon receive. While creatures like Ho-Oh and Rayquaza inspire awe and fear, Mew inspires affection and curiosity. It plays with bubbles, chases butterflies, and seems genuinely delighted by simple experiences. This childlike joy makes it relatable despite its immense power, suggesting that wisdom and strength don't require solemnity or distance. Mew engages with the world directly and enthusiastically, finding wonder in ordinary moments rather than standing apart as an untouchable legend. This approach to existence might be what allows it to learn any move. It doesn't impose limitations on itself, doesn't decide in advance what it should or shouldn't be capable of learning, but approaches every experience as an opportunity to understand something new. The teleportation ability that Mew demonstrates with casual ease suggests mastery over space that goes beyond simple movement. When it vanishes from one location and reappears in another, there's no sense of travel or transition, just instant relocation that bypasses all physical distance. This ability would make Mew effectively uncatchable if it chose to remain free, as no trap or strategy could contain something capable of leaving whenever it wanted. The fact that some trainers do manage to catch Mew suggests either that the creature allows itself to be caught out of curiosity or interest, or that the bonds formed with trainers override its preference for freedom. Either interpretation paints Mew as an active participant in its own capture, rather than a victim of superior tactics, reinforcing the idea that relationships with mythical Pokémon represent partnerships more than ownership. The pink coloration that defines Mew's appearance carries no obvious evolutionary advantage, leading some researchers to speculate that its color serves a different purpose than camouflage or display. Perhaps the pink serves as a marker, a deliberate signal that makes Mew visible to those who might seek it, while still allowing it to vanish when it chooses. The color also connects it to themes of warmth and approachability, psychological associations that make creatures seem less threatening and more inviting. Whether these associations affect how other Pokémon perceive Mew remains unknown, but for human trainers, the pink definitely contributes to Mew's overall charm and appeal. A different color might have made the same creature feel entirely different, perhaps more alien or unsettling, demonstrating how much visual presentation shapes emotional response. The psychological profile of a creature like Mew, if such a thing could be accurately assembled, would likely reveal patterns of extreme curiosity combined with deep contentment. Mew seems genuinely happy most of the time, satisfied with its existence, and interested in exploring the world without needing to control or change it. This emotional baseline of positive engagement differs from many powerful Pokémon, which often carry burdens of responsibility, loneliness, or purpose that prevent simple enjoyment. Mew's freedom from these weights might stem from its unique position. It's not a guardian of anything, doesn't maintain ecological balance or watch over civilizations, has no duties except those it chooses to accept. This lack of imposed purpose allows it to define itself moment by moment, being whatever it wants to be without external expectations constraining its choices. The relationship between Mew and the concept of potential runs throughout its lore and mechanics. As the supposed ancestor of all Pokémon, it represents unrealized possibility, the point before specialization and divergence created distinct species. Every Pokémon that exists could theoretically be traced back to Mew, suggesting that within its genetic code lies every shape, every ability, every adaptation that evolution has produced. This makes Mew less a single creature and more a living library of possibilities, a being that contains multitudes while still maintaining a coherent, individual identity. The paradox of being simultaneously one thing and many things might explain Mew's transformability. It's not creating something new when it changes shape, but revealing something that was always within it, manifesting one of countless potential configurations that its genetics already accommodate. When trainers attempt to build competitive teams around Mew, they often struggle with option paralysis. Having access to nearly any move means choosing which ones to actually use becomes unexpectedly difficult. Commit to physical attacks and abandon special moves, focus on support, and give up offensive presence. The decision paralysis reflects Mew's nature as a creature of infinite potential, which in practice becomes a limitation because infinite choices require difficult exclusions. This mechanical challenge mirrors philosophical questions about freedom and limitation. Having every option available might feel less liberating than having clear constraints that guide decision-making. Mew's unlimited move pool forces trainers to impose their own limits, to decide what Mew should be in their specific context, since it can't simultaneously be everything it's capable of becoming. The rarity of Mew sightings in the wild suggests a creature that values privacy and solitude despite its playful nature. Most encounters happen accidentally, with travelers stumbling across Mew rather than tracking it deliberately. This elusive quality protects Mew from constant harassment while still allowing occasional contact with the world beyond its hidden sanctuaries. The balance between isolation and engagement seems carefully maintained, as though Mew has calculated exactly how much interaction serves its curiosity without compromising its autonomy. Those who do encounter it often describe the experience as dreamlike, questioning afterward whether they really saw what they thought they saw, or if imagination filled gaps in memory. This uncertainty serves Mew well, allowing it to move through the world without leaving traces definitive enough to enable systematic tracking. The evolutionary tree that researchers construct with Mew at its base branches in thousands of directions, each path representing a different adaptation to environmental pressures and opportunities. Fire types evolved to survive in volcanic regions, water types developed in oceans and rivers, grass types emerged in forests and plains. Every specialization represents a choice made across generations, DNA selecting specific traits while discarding others. Mew retains all these discarded possibilities, carrying the complete library of what Pokémon could have been alongside what they became. This makes it a living archive of evolutionary history, a creature that remembers every path not taken while embodying the moment before paths diverged at all. The psychic abilities that Mew wields with effortless grace represent the pinnacle of mental evolution, consciousness refined to the point where thought directly shapes reality. Unlike Deoxys, which seems to calculate and analyze, Mew's psychic use feels intuitive and spontaneous, as natural as breathing. It doesn't appear to concentrate or strain when moving objects telepathically or reading surface thoughts from nearby beings. These abilities simply extend from its existence, like light from a flame, always present and always available. This ease suggests either that Mew possesses mental power far exceeding what it typically displays, or that its consciousness operates on principles fundamentally different from how other psychic types process and channel their abilities. In ancient texts discovered in libraries across various regions, references to a pink wanderer appear with surprising consistency. These documents, written by cultures separated by thousands of miles and centuries of time, describe encounters with what could only be Mew. The descriptions vary in details, but converge on essential elements. A small, playful creature with immense power that appeared to travelers, scholars, and children, often in moments of curiosity or need. Some accounts describe Mew granting wishes or solving problems through mysterious means, while others simply note its presence as a blessing or sign of good fortune. These stories suggest that Mew has interacted with humans throughout recorded history, though always on its own terms and according to its own inscrutable purposes. The island where Mew was first officially encountered in modern times remains largely undeveloped, preserved as a natural sanctuary where researchers can study the environment that supports such a rare creature. The island's ecosystem demonstrates unusual diversity, with species that shouldn't coexist thriving in close proximity without apparent competition. This harmony might result from Mew's presence, its power unconsciously maintaining balance and preventing any single species from dominating. Or the balance might be what attracted Mew in the first place, a perfect environment that reflected something in the creature's nature. Either way, the island serves as proof that Mew prefers places where life flourishes in all its varied forms, where complexity and interconnection reach levels that most ecosystems never achieve. The debate about whether Mew truly serves as the ancestor of all Pokémon continues among researchers, with evidence supporting multiple interpretations. Genetic analysis shows undeniable connections, but whether these connections indicate descent or convergent evolution remains contested. Some scientists argue that Mew's genetic diversity comes from absorbing and incorporating DNA from other species rather than being their source. This theory suggests Mew might be a collector rather than a creator, gathering pieces of the biological puzzle from everything it encounters until its genome became a comprehensive library of all Pokémon genetics. This interpretation would explain how such a small, seemingly modern creature could contain the full evolutionary history of thousands of species, sidestepping the temporal paradox that makes the ancestor theory difficult to accept without reservation. Mew's capacity for joy and play stands in stark contrast to the burdens carried by most legendary Pokémon. Where others shoulder responsibilities for maintaining ecosystems, guarding ancient secrets, or protecting civilization, Mew simply exists, pursuing its curiosity and finding delight in discovery. This freedom from duty might be what allows it to remain so playful and open to experience. Without obligations defining its existence, Mew can approach each moment fresh, responding to what interests it rather than what it must do. This doesn't mean Mew avoids helping others or contributing to the world's well-being, just that such actions come from choice rather than obligation, genuine desire rather than imposed responsibility. The distinction matters, as it preserves Mew's agency and prevents the kind of existential weight that makes some legendary beings seem weary despite their power. The molecular structure of Mew's cells exhibits properties that challenge conventional biology. The cell walls demonstrate selective permeability that exceeds normal membranes, allowing precise control over what enters and exits at rates that should be impossible without active transport mechanisms. The nucleus contains chromosomes that reorganize themselves rapidly, suggesting that Mew's DNA isn't fixed in a single configuration but fluid, responding to environmental factors or internal commands in real time. This genetic flexibility would explain how transform works at the cellular level, with Mew's DNA literally rewriting itself to match the target's genetic code before expressing those new instructions as physical changes. The speed and precision required for such transformations suggests computing power at the molecular level, cells processing information and executing changes faster than conscious thought could direct. When Mew encounters other mythical Pokémon, the interactions vary dramatically depending on the specific creature and circumstances. Some meetings occur peacefully, with both beings acknowledging each other before moving on without conflict or extended contact. Others involve playful exchanges, with Mew testing the other creature's reactions through gentle pranks or curious investigations. Rarely, encounters turn hostile, though even these conflicts often feel more like miscommunications than genuine animosity. Mew's non-threatening appearance and demeanor usually prevent serious fighting, as most legendary Pokémon recognize it as something special even when they don't understand exactly what it represents. This recognition creates a kind of diplomatic immunity, allowing Mew to move through territories claimed by powerful beings without triggering defensive responses. The ancient ruins in South America, where Mew samples were discovered, contain artwork that depicts the creature in various contexts, some of which don't align with modern understanding. One carving shows Mew surrounded by primitive humans who seem to be offering gifts or prayers, suggesting a worship relationship. Another depicts it alongside creatures that don't correspond to any known Pokémon species, either representing species now extinct or artistic license taken by the carvers. The most puzzling images show Mew in what appears to be a teaching role, with smaller figures arranged around it as though listening or learning. These carvings suggest that ancient peoples viewed Mew as more than just a powerful creature, perhaps seeing it as a guide or mentor, of being willing to share knowledge with those who approached it properly. The metabolic processes that keep Mew alive remain mysterious, as observations suggest it can survive without eating or drinking for extended periods that should be fatal. Some researchers theorize that it photosynthesizes like plants, using its pink skin to absorb sunlight and convert it to energy. Others believe it feeds on ambient psychic energy, drawing sustenance from the mental activity of creatures around it. A third theory suggests Mew can enter states of extreme metabolic dormancy, slowing its cellular processes to near Ting-G levels when resources aren't available, and then resuming full activity when conditions improve. Any of these explanations, or some combination of them, could account for Mew's apparent ability to thrive in various environments without visible food sources. The question remains open because Mew has never been kept in captivity long enough for comprehensive study, always escaping or being released before conclusive data could be gathered. The connection between Mew and the legendary bird trio, Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres, appears in some mythological accounts, but not others, creating ambiguity about whether the connection actually exists or represents later embellishment. Stories describe Mew creating the birds to regulate weather patterns and maintain environmental balance, dividing its own power among three distinct beings so the work wouldn't require its constant attention. Other versions present the birds as independent entities that Mew merely encountered and befriended, with no creation relationship between them. The truth likely lies somewhere in these extremes, with connections existing, but their nature more complex than simple creation or complete independence. Perhaps Mew influenced the birds' evolution, guiding their development toward specific roles without explicitly creating them. Or perhaps the stories conflate correlation with causation, noting that Mew and the birds all existed in ancient times and assuming relationship from proximity. When Mew uses Transform in battle, the change happens so rapidly that opponents often don't register it before the transformation completes. One moment they're facing a small pink creature, the next they're looking at a perfect copy of themselves or their partner Pokémon. The psychological impact of this mirrors fighting adds another dimension to combat beyond simple stat matching. Seeing your own Pokémon turned against you, even temporarily, creates confusion and hesitation that Mew can exploit. The transformation also demonstrates absolute confidence in Mew essentially saying it can beat opponents at their own game using their own strengths. This boldness rarely comes across as arrogance though, because Mew's playful energy makes even competitive battles feel like games rather than life or death struggles. The question of whether Mew experiences loneliness, given its unique status in the Pokémon world, prompts speculation among researchers who study legendary creatures. As possibly the only member of its species, Mew lacks the social structure that defines most Pokemon lives. It has no herd, no flock, no family group providing constant companionship and support. Yet it seems content in solitude, happy to travel alone and make brief connections with other creatures without forming permanent bonds. This suggests either that Mew doesn't experience social needs the way gregarious species do, or that it finds sufficient companionship in temporary encounters and doesn't require the sustained relationships that others depend on. The frequent use of transform might provide a kind of vicarious social experience, allowing Mew to temporarily inhabit the lives of species that do form tight social groups, experiencing their perspective before returning to its natural solitary state. The maximum lifespan of Mew remains unknown and potentially unknowable, as no one has observed one from birth to death. The creatures mentioned in ancient texts might be the same individual that appears in modern encounters, or they might be ancestors of current Mew, or the texts might describe different creatures entirely, and later interpretation applied Mew retroactively to stories that originally concerned other beings. Without death as a data point, researchers can only note that Mew shows no visible signs of aging, maintaining the same youthful appearance and energetic behavior across all recorded encounters. This suggests either extreme longevity or biological immortality, the ability to repair and maintain cellular integrity indefinitely without the gradual degradation that eventually claims mortal creatures. If Mew truly doesn't age, it joins a very small group of beings that exist outside normal lifespans, watching ages pass while remaining essentially unchanged. The teleportation signature that Mew leaves when vanishing differs subtly from how other Pokemon teleport, creating a shimmer in the air that persists for a few seconds after it disappears. This signature indicates different mechanisms or techniques, Mew accomplishing the same result through methods unique to itself. Advanced sensors can detect the residual psychic energy and analyze its properties, revealing patterns that don't match any other known teleportation effect. The differences suggest that Mew might be accessing different dimensions or folding space in novel ways, treating distance as something more fluid and negotiable than simple point-to-point movement. Understanding these differences could revolutionize how teleportation works, but Mew's unwillingness to submit to controlled study prevents researchers from gathering the data needed to decode its techniques fully. In the years following its initial discovery, Mew became a symbol of mystery and possibility for trainers worldwide. Its image appeared on merchandise, in artwork, in stories and songs that celebrated the idea of a creature containing all potential within small, approachable form. This cultural impact extended far beyond competitive battling or Pokédex completion, making Mew an icon that represented the franchise's core themes of friendship, discovery, and connection. The fact that relatively few people actually owned Mew didn't diminish its cultural presence. If anything, the rarity enhanced it, allowing Mew to exist as aspiration and ideal rather than merely as another team member. This symbolic significance ensures that even as new generations introduce new mythical Pokémon, Mew retains special status as the first, the template that established what these rare creatures could mean to players. The underwater caverns, where some sightings place Mew, suggest comfort in aquatic environments, despite having no obvious adaptations for water living. Mew doesn't possess gills or webbed appendages, yet witnesses describe it swimming with effortless grace, moving through water as easily as air. This versatility reinforces the idea that Mew isn't constrained by environment, that it can adapt to any conditions it encounters without needing specialized physical structures. The ability might stem from its psychic powers, using telekinesis on itself to move through resistant mediums, or from shape-shifting that occurs too subtly to observe, internal adjustments that optimize efficiency without changing external appearance. Either way, the comfort in diverse environments makes sense for a creature representing all Pokémon, which collectively inhabit every possible niche, from deep ocean trenches to volcanic craters to high mountain peaks. When younger trainers dream of encountering Mew, they often imagine befriending it through kindness and shared play, forming connections based on mutual enjoyment, rather than the challenge and capture formula that defines most Pokémon relationships. This gentler fantasy reflects Mew's presentation as approachable and friendly, a creature that might choose companionship freely rather than requiring defeat before partnership. While the games force traditional battle and capture mechanics, the wider media and player imagination often prefer scenarios where Mew joins trainers who demonstrate worthiness through compassion, curiosity, and respect for its autonomy. These alternative narratives satisfy desires for relationships that transcend the typical trainer-Pokemon dynamic, suggesting possibilities for connection that don't require dominance or ownership as prerequisites. Celebi represents time itself, made manifest, a creature that moves through history as easily as others move through space. Unlike Mew's focus on biology and potential, Celebi concerns itself with temporal flows and the preservation of moments that matter. The small green mythical Pokémon appears as a sprite or fairy with wings that suggest both nature and transcendence. Its ability to travel through time isn't mere teleportation across seconds and centuries, but genuine movement along the fourth dimension, visiting past and future as distinct locations rather than abstract concepts. This power makes Celebi one of the most dangerous and most delicate mythical Pokémon, as careless time travel could create paradoxes that unravel causality itself. The designation as Guardian of the Forest connects Celebi to specific sacred groves where time seems to flow differently than in surrounding areas. These forests experience seasons out of sync with the world beyond their borders, blooming in winter or dropping leaves in summer without apparent cause. The temporal distortions stem from Celebi's presence, its movement through time creating ripples that affect the local environment in unpredictable ways. Trees in these forests grow faster than they should, reaching maturity in decades rather than centuries, while others remain unchanged for generations, as though time itself can't decide what rate to impose. Researchers who study these phenomena often report disorientation and memory confusion, experiencing déjà vu or remembering events that haven't occurred yet, side effects of extended exposure to Celebi's temporal wake. Celebi's role as a time traveler gives it unique perspective on history and change. It can visit the distant past, witnessing firsthand how ancient civilizations rose and fell, how continents shifted and species evolved. Then it can jump to the future, observing outcomes that won't occur for centuries, seeing how present choices ripple forward into unimaginable change. This knowledge must be both enlightening and burdensome, understanding that all moments are equally real and present, while also knowing that certain timelines lead to disaster while others flourish. The weight of such knowledge might explain why Celebi often appears sad or thoughtful in encounters, as though carrying memories of futures that should never come to pass. The onion-shaped body that characterizes Celebi's design references the layered nature of time itself, each moment building on previous ones while containing seeds of what comes next. The wings that sprout from its back shimmer with rainbow colors, suggesting the full spectrum of possibilities contained in each branching timeline. When Celebi flies, it leaves trails of light that fade slowly, like afterimages of paths through time that briefly overlap with the present before diverging again. These visual effects aren't merely aesthetic, but represent genuine temporal phenomena, moments when past and future bleed through into now, creating brief windows where impossible things become briefly possible. The time travel mechanics that Celebi employs remain poorly understood despite extensive study. Unlike fictional time machines that require massive energy expenditures and complex calculations, Celebi moves through time as naturally as breathing. It doesn't appear to strain or prepare, just disappears from one moment and emerges in another as though the temporal distance means nothing. This ease suggests either that time isn't actually the rigid structure physics describes, or that Celebi exists partially outside time, able to step sideways into perspectives where past and future lie adjacent to present. Either explanation makes Celebi fundamentally incomprehensible to beings locked into experiencing time linearly, creatures for whom tomorrow is always unknowable and yesterday is always fixed. When Celebi appears in forest clearings at specific times, usually during solstices or equinoxes when the boundary between seasons feels thin, it brings with it air that smells of every season simultaneously. Witnesses describe spring blossoms and autumn decay, summer heat and winter frost, all present in the same breath. This olfactory confusion makes encountering Celebi disorienting in ways beyond simple visual wonder, engaging senses that expect consistency and finding instead impossible combinations. The effect fades when Celebi departs, but for the duration of its presence, the normal flow of time seems negotiable, as though the forest itself remembers being many different versions of itself and can't decide which one to currently be. The relationship between Celebi and human civilization appears more fraught than Mew's curious friendliness. Where Mew observes and occasionally plays, Celebi seems to judge, appearing at crucial moments in history to witness decisions that will shape future generations. Some accounts describe Celebi intervening to prevent catastrophes, subtly influencing events to guide timelines toward better outcomes. Other stories present it as purely observational, watching terrible choices unfold without interference, suggesting either that it follows strict rules about temporal contamination or that it understands intervention creates worse problems than inaction. The truth likely varies case by case, with Celebi making individual determinations about when to act and when to merely observe and remember. The forest shrine where Celebi is said to appear contains wood from trees that shouldn't exist in the same location, species from different continents and eras growing side by side without explanation. Botanists who examine these trees find growth rings that contradict their apparent age, saplings with centuries of rings, or ancient-looking trees with barely a decade recorded in their trunks. These temporal anomalies suggest that Celebi doesn't just travel through time, but can bring pieces of different eras back with it, creating pockets where multiple periods overlap and coexist. The shrine becomes a museum of moments, each tree a living artifact from a specific time, carefully preserved in the present as a reminder or warning. Celebi's ability to communicate across time allows it to deliver messages between past and future, creating paradoxical loops where information flows backward causally. A trainer might receive warning about future danger from their older self via Celebi, acting on that information to avoid catastrophe, which prevents the older self from experiencing what prompted the warning in the first place. These loops should create contradictions that unravel reality, yet somehow Celebi navigates them successfully, suggesting it understands temporal mechanics at levels that transcend simple cause and effect. Perhaps from Celebi's perspective, all timelines exist simultaneously, and the concept of paradox doesn't apply when you can see every version of events as equally valid and real. The green coloring that defines Celebi's appearance connects it to growth, renewal, and the natural cycles that govern plant life. Unlike Mew's pink that suggests warmth and approachability, Celebi's green feels more aloof and mysterious, the color of deep forests where sunlight struggles to penetrate. The choice emphasizes Celebi's role as nature guardian rather than playful wanderer, a being whose priorities align with ecosystem health and temporal flow rather than immediate friendship. This doesn't make Celebi unfriendly, just focused on scales and concerns that individual beings often don't comprehend fully. A tree that lives centuries experiences time differently than creatures that measure lives in decades, and Celebi's consciousness likely resembles forests more than animals, patient and slow despite its ability to move through time instantly. In battles, Celebi demonstrates unusual fighting patterns that suggest it knows how attacks will unfold before they're launched. It dodges with minimal movement, shifting just enough to avoid harm without wasting energy on dramatic evasion. This precision comes from perceiving probability clouds around every action, seeing where attacks might land, and positioning itself in the gaps between possibilities. Opponents facing Celebi often feel like they're fighting someone who's already watched the battle's recording and knows every move before it happens. This perception isn't wrong, as Celebi might genuinely be experiencing the fight from multiple temporal perspectives simultaneously, living through loss and victory in parallel before choosing the timeline where it succeeds. The forest fires that Celebi works to prevent represent not just immediate ecological damage, but temporal scars that would ripple across centuries. A forest destroyed now means species extinction, habitat loss, and carbon release that would compound over generations. From Celebi's perspective, which sees these consequences as already occurred rather than merely potential, preventing fire becomes a matter of protecting actual futures rather than hypothetical possibilities. This makes conservation more than ethics or aesthetics for Celebi. It's about maintaining timelines where biodiversity flourishes and systems remain balanced. The passionate dedication it brings to forest protection stems from having witnessed the alternatives, futures where unchecked destruction creates cascading failures that take centuries to recover from, if they recover at all. The mysterious circumstances surrounding Celebi's origins raise questions about whether it was created by time travel paradox or has always existed in a stable time loop. One theory suggests that a future Celebi traveled back to the beginning and created itself, forming a causal loop with no clear origin point. Another proposes that Celebi emerged naturally from ancient forests and later discovered its time travel abilities through exposure to temporal anomalies. A third possibility suggests that Celebi exists outside normal time and merely appears to travel through it, actually just making different parts of itself visible in different moments. None of these theories can be proven without more information than Celebi is willing to provide, and it seems content to let its origins remain shrouded in temporal mystery. The emotional impact of meeting Celebi varies dramatically depending on the encounter circumstances. Those who see it during moments of natural beauty, during perfect sunsets or gentle rains in deep forest, often describe profound peace and sense that everything is connected across time. Others who encounter it during disasters or crucial decisions report feeling crushing weights of responsibility, as though Celebi's presence emphasizes how much depends on what they choose next. These different responses suggest that Celebi's appearance carries meaning that changes based on context, the creature itself serving as mirror that reflects temporal significance of specific moments back to those experiencing them. The GS ball, a mysterious object featured in the anime and tied to Celebi in certain storylines, demonstrates the kind of physical artifacts that connect to temporal beings. The ball's unusual properties, including resistance to all attempts at opening or scanning, suggest technologies or materials from different time periods merged into a single object. Whether Celebi created the ball or simply became associated with it remains unclear, but the connection between mythical creature and mysterious artifact follows patterns seen with other legendaries, where physical objects serve as anchors or catalysts for encounters with beings that exist partially outside normal reality. The network of sacred groves that Celebi maintains across different regions suggests something like an ecosystem of time, locations where temporal flow remains healthy and balanced. These sites might function as temporal wells that other locations draw from, maintaining stable causality in the broader world by concentrating temporal anomalies in controlled spaces. Celebi moves between these groves constantly, though from an outside perspective, its visits seem random and infrequent. The apparent randomness might simply reflect limitations in how linear beings perceive nonlinear movement, like watching a movie from random frames and trying to understand the plot. From Celebi's timeless perspective, it's probably maintaining perfect regular schedule, visiting each grove at precisely calculated intervals to ensure none drift too far from temporal stability. The psychic grass typing that defines Celebi in game terms creates interesting mechanical and thematic connections between mental power and natural growth. The combination suggests that understanding nature requires mental flexibility, ability to perceive patterns and relationships that pure observation misses. It also implies that healthy ecosystems depend partly on psychic factors, on the collective consciousness of the creatures that inhabit them, creating feedback loops that influence physical development. Celebi embodies both aspects, using psychic abilities to perceive and maintain temporal health, while also directly contributing to physical growth through its presence and actions. The signature move that Celebi employs in certain encounters, Future Sight, perfectly captures its temporal nature. The attack doesn't land immediately, but arrives from the future, striking several turns after being initiated. This mechanic mirrors how Celebi experiences time, setting events in motion and then allowing causality to unfold toward predetermined outcomes. The attack can't be dodged once initiated because it's already landed from a temporal perspective. The target just hasn't reached the moment of impact yet. This makes Future Sight both powerful and thematically appropriate, a mechanical representation of how time travel allows actions in the present to be informed by knowledge of future results. When Celebi grants visions of possible futures to those it deems worthy, the recipients often describe the experience as overwhelming and disorienting, seeing their choices branch into countless timelines, each with unique consequences. The visions don't dictate specific actions, but illuminate possibilities, showing what could happen if certain paths are taken. This knowledge empowers but also paralyzes, as understanding the stakes of every decision makes choosing anything feel impossible. Most people who receive these visions ultimately make choices based on incomplete information anyway, unable to fully process the complexity Celebi revealed, and defaulting to intuition or values rather than attempting to optimize across all possible futures. This suggests that Celebi's gifts aren't meant to enable perfect decision-making, but to foster humility and awareness of how interconnected and consequential all choices truly are. The seasonal festivals that celebrate Celebi in certain cultures blend mythology, ecology, and temporal awareness into community rituals that honor the passage of time itself. These celebrations don't worship Celebi as a deity, but acknowledge it as a guardian and manifestation of principles that govern existence. Participants plant trees, tell stories of ancestors, make pledges about future generations, all activities that connect past, present, and future into continuous narrative. Whether Celebi attends these festivals remains unknown, but believers maintain that the creature appreciates efforts to think across timescales larger than individual lifespans, to make choices that serve not just immediate needs, but long-term flourishing. The corrupted version of Celebi that appears in certain timelines demonstrates what happens when temporal guardians lose their way or become damaged through exposure to catastrophic futures. This darkened Celebi carries scars from timelines that should never have existed. It's usually bright green replaced by sickly gray and purple. The corruption stems from witnessing or experiencing futures so terrible that they fundamentally break something in Celebi's consciousness, twisting its protective instincts into despair and destructive impulses. These encounters suggest that even beings with power over time aren't immune to trauma, that knowledge of certain futures can damage psyche irreparably. Healing corrupted Celebi requires not just physical care, but temporal intervention, traveling to points before the trauma occurred, and creating new branches where the catastrophic futures never manifest. This process resembles therapy for beings whose consciousness extends across multiple timelines simultaneously, requiring both compassion and precise understanding of how temporal experiences shape identity. The voice that Celebi uses in rare moments of direct communication sounds like wind through ancient trees, layered and resonant with harmonics that suggest multiple time streams speaking simultaneously. The words themselves often prove difficult to parse, not because of language barriers, but because Celebi's messages reference events across different temporal positions, mixing past warnings with future observations in ways that create apparent contradiction. Listeners must interpret these communications less as linear statements and more as temporal maps. Understanding that Celebi's perspective allows it to see connections between moments that seem unrelated from inside the time stream. The resulting messages feel like poetry or prophecy, rich with meaning but resistant to simple translation into actionable information. The relationship between Celebi and other time-manipulating Pokémon like Dialga creates interesting hierarchies and distinctions in how temporal power manifests. Dialga represents time as fundamental universal force, the arrow that ensures causality and progression. Celebi operates within time's flow rather than controlling it absolutely, more like a skilled swimmer in a river than the river itself. This makes Celebi powerful, but not omnipotent regarding temporal matters, able to move through time's current, but unable to stop or reverse the current entirely. When the two beings meet, which happens rarely and under unusual circumstances, Dialga generally defers to temporal precedents, while Celebi shows respect for the greater being's fundamental authority. The dynamic resembles a master craftsman acknowledging an elemental force, both powerful in their domains, but not in competition. Jirachi awakens once every 1,000 years for 7 days, a sleep-wake cycle so extended that entire civilizations rise and fall between its conscious periods. The small, steel psychic type mythical Pokémon resembles a star given physical form, with ribbon-like appendages and a third eye on its belly that opens only when granting wishes. This wish-granting ability makes Jirachi one of the most sought-after mythical Pokémon, though the reality of its power differs significantly from fantastical expectations. Jirachi doesn't simply manifest desires from nothing, but rather identifies probable futures where the desired outcome already exists and helps guide reality toward those timelines. This means wishes must be possible within the universe's physical laws and existing probability distributions. Wishing for something that violates causality or thermodynamics will fail no matter how sincerely Jirachi tries to grant it. The 1,000-year sleep that defines Jirachi's existence serves purposes beyond simple rest. During dormancy, Jirachi processes and integrates the experiences from its 7-day waking period, analyzing every wish granted, every interaction experienced, every moment of consciousness. This deep processing creates a kind of compound learning where knowledge accumulates across millennia, each awakening building on wisdom from all previous periods. Despite sleeping through most of history, Jirachi possesses understanding that spans epochs, recognizing patterns in how civilizations develop, how individuals seek happiness, and how wishes reflect the deep needs that drive conscious beings. This ancient wisdom makes Jirachi simultaneously childlike in enthusiasm and anciently wise in judgment, a paradoxical combination that makes encounters with it feel both playful and profound. The comet that appears in the sky when Jirachi awakens serves as both alarm clock and energy source, the cosmic radiation it emits triggering Jirachi's consciousness while also recharging the power reserves depleted during the previous waking period. The comet's precise orbit brings it close to the planet only once every millennium, a celestial synchronization that suggests either remarkable coincidence or intentional design. Scientists who track the comet note subtle changes in its trajectory over multiple passes, adjustments that shouldn't occur naturally but seem calculated to ensure continued alignment with Jirachi's cycle. This implies either that Jirachi can influence orbital mechanics while sleeping, or that something else actively maintains the comet's path to preserve the awakening cycle. Either explanation suggests cosmic scale planning and power that makes Jirachi's small, cute appearance somewhat deceptive. The wish tags that often appear on Jirachi's head, appendages in various media, represent prayers and hopes written by people who know the creature will eventually awaken. These tags accumulate over centuries, layering desire upon desire until Jirachi emerges buried under thousands of wishes it couldn't possibly grant in just 7 days. The physical weight of all these hopes might contribute to why Jirachi sleeps so long, exhausted by the burden of expectation that communities heap upon it. When it does wake, Jirachi must triage, selecting which wishes to attempt based on criteria only it fully understands. Some years, it might focus on a single individual whose need seems particularly worthy. Other times, it spreads thin effort across many small wishes, touching numerous lives without transforming any completely. The apparent randomness of who receives help and who doesn't often frustrates observers, but from Jirachi's temporal perspective, patterns likely emerge that justify each decision. The steel typing that balances Jirachi's psychic nature creates interesting thematic resonance, combining the malleability of wishes with the firmness of reality. Steel represents limitation and boundary, the hard facts that dreams must accommodate rather than ignore. By embodying both wish fulfillment and material constraint, Jirachi serves as a reminder that magic and limitation aren't opposites, but partners in creation. The most meaningful wishes aren't those that demand impossible transformations, but those that work within reality's structures to create genuine positive change. Jirachi's steel typing ensures it understands these boundaries intimately, preventing it from promising or attempting things that would ultimately harm recipients by divorcing them from consequence and responsibility. The 7-day limit on Jirachi's waking period creates urgency that transforms how it experiences consciousness. While awake, every moment matters profoundly because there are so few before the next millennium-long sleep. This makes Jirachi's attention intense and focused, fully present in ways that beings with unlimited waking time rarely achieve. Every conversation might be the last it has for 1,000 years. Every granted wish might be the final one before dormancy. This awareness infuses Jirachi's interactions with weight and care, treating even casual exchanges as potentially significant because from its perspective, they are. The countdown toward sleep creates natural narrative structure in any story involving Jirachi, a ticking clock that adds stakes and poignancy to every choice it makes while conscious. The way Jirachi grants wishes involves complex probability manipulation that scientists struggle to document or explain. When someone makes a request, Jirachi enters a brief trance, during which it perceives branching timelines spreading from the present moment. It identifies futures where the desired outcome naturally emerges, and then subtly guides reality toward those branches through micro-interventions that seem coincidental but accumulate toward specific results. A wish for health might lead Jirachi to influence which doctor a person randomly chooses, which treatment option seems most appealing, which lifestyle change suddenly feels manageable. None of these interventions force specific choices, but collectively they tilt probability toward healing outcomes. The granted wish feels earned rather than magical because in a real sense it was earned, just with invisible support, that made success more likely than it otherwise would have been. The third eye on Jirachi's abdomen serves as a window into its wish-granting consciousness, opening only when it actively works to manifest desires. Through this eye, witnesses report seeing colors that don't exist in normal spectrum, fractal patterns that suggest infinite complexity compressed into finite space, and brief glimpses of what might be alternate realities or possible futures. Staring into this eye too long reportedly causes disorientation and existential questioning as viewers confront the vast possibility space that Jirachi navigates constantly. The eye closes when wishes are complete, or when Jirachi retreats into protection of its own consciousness, hiding its internal processes from observation. This periodic concealment might protect both Jirachi and observers, preventing the kind of knowledge that would overwhelm normal consciousness unable to process multidimensional probability calculations. The friendships that form between Jirachi and those it awakens near often carry bittersweet quality, as both parties know the connection will end when sleep reclaims the mythical Pokémon. These temporary bonds can nevertheless prove profound, as Jirachi's complete presence and genuine care during its brief waking period often exceeds what people experience in much longer relationships. The impending separation makes every interaction precious, encouraging honesty and depth that longer timelines might dilute with assumptions of unlimited future opportunities. When Jirachi finally returns to dormancy, those left behind must carry the relationship's memory for lifetimes, while Jirachi sleeps until a world barely recognizable emerges for its next awakening. This temporal asymmetry creates melancholy undertone even in happy encounters, the knowledge that reunion is impossible for anyone except Jirachi, who will eventually wake again, but to different people in a transformed world. The crystalline cocoon that forms around Jirachi during its sleeping periods resembles both a protective shell and artistic sculpture, surfaces reflecting light in patterns that seem to shift when viewed from different angles. The crystal grows from unknown processes within Jirachi's body, secreting outward until it completely encases the small form in what looks like amber or gemstone. This cocoon protects Jirachi from environmental changes that occur over the millennium, maintaining stable temperature and pressure regardless of external conditions. It also prevents anyone from waking Jirachi prematurely, as the crystal proves extraordinarily resistant to damage or penetration. Only the comet's specific radiation can trigger the dissolution process that frees Jirachi from its self-imposed prison, ensuring the cycle continues uninterrupted by well-meaning or selfish humans who might want to exploit its power outside the natural awakening schedule. The locations where Jirachi sleeps change between cycles, as if the creature or some guiding force selects new sites for each dormancy period. Sometimes it rests on mountain peaks, where air stays thin and cold for centuries. Other times it settles in deep caves or ocean trenches, protected by layers of earth or water from casual discovery. This relocation pattern might serve protective purposes, preventing anyone from camping out near the cocoon and immediately claiming Jirachi's attention when it wakes. Or it might reflect Jirachi's own preferences, choosing rest locations that will wake it in interesting or need-appropriate places. The unpredictability means that encountering Jirachi requires either extreme luck or access to astronomical calculations that predict the comet's position and extrapolate likely awakening sites. Most people who meet Jirachi do so accidentally, stumbling across its awakening without planning or preparation. The psychological toll of consciousness scattered across such vast timescales remains difficult to assess, as Jirachi rarely discusses its inner experience. Does it remember all previous awakenings clearly, or do older memories fade like anyone else's, despite the extended timescale? When it sleeps, does it dream, or does consciousness simply pause until the comet's energy restarts it? These questions go largely unanswered because Jirachi tends toward action rather than introspection, focusing its limited waking time on fulfilling its role rather than explaining itself. This pragmatic orientation makes sense given time constraints, but it also preserves mystery around what it means to be a being for whom consciousness is a rare, brief gift rather than a continuous given. The wish economy that emerges in cultures aware of Jirachi's existence creates interesting social dynamics around who deserves access to the creature during its waking period. Some communities establish lottery systems to fairly distribute opportunity to petition Jirachi. Others grant access based on merit or suffering, trying to ensure wishes go to those with greatest need. Still others allow open competition, with Jirachi deciding independently who to help based on its own inscrutable criteria. These different approaches reflect varying philosophical assumptions about fairness, desert, and the role of chance versus judgment in distributing extraordinary benefits. Jirachi itself seems indifferent to these human-created systems, sometimes selecting people who never formally petitioned and ignoring those who invested tremendous effort in obtaining audience. This apparent capriciousness might reflect that Jirachi perceives needs that individuals themselves don't recognize, granting wishes people didn't know they needed, or skipping obvious requests because granting them would ultimately harm rather than help. The connection between sleep and wish fulfillment in Jirachi's mythology creates symbolic resonance with how dreams function in human psychology. During sleep, the unconscious mind processes experiences, works through problems, and sometimes arrives at solutions that conscious thought couldn't reach. Jirachi embodies this process that's externalized and amplified, taking the 1,000-year sleep not as empty downtime, but as essential integration period that enables meaningful action during waking hours. This suggests that rest isn't absence of productivity, but different kind of work, internal processing that makes external achievement possible. Cultures that honor Jirachi often extend this wisdom to their own rest practices, valuing sleep and reflection as necessary components of effective living rather than obstacles to constant activity. The star shape that defines Jirachi's head design connects it to wishes made on celestial phenomena, a tradition that exists across cultures worldwide. Seeing a shooting star and immediately formulating a desire creates a moment where hope and cosmic chance briefly align, and Jirachi physically embodies that alignment. Its very form reminds observers that wishes aren't demands for impossible transformation, but recognition of possibilities already present in the universe, waiting for the right circumstances to manifest. By looking like a wish made physical, Jirachi encourages people to understand their deepest desires as pointing toward potentials that genuine effort and favorable chance could realize, rather than as fantasies that require violations of natural law. The battle capabilities that Jirachi possesses, despite its small size and generally benevolent role, reflect the defensive necessities of beings who sleep for millennia in potentially vulnerable states. While awake, Jirachi demonstrates steel-type moves that create protective barriers and psychic attacks that overwhelm opponents through precise mental strikes. These abilities suggest that even wish granters need boundaries and the capacity to enforce them against those who would exploit rather than respect their gifts. Jirachi's willingness to fight when necessary reminds that kindness shouldn't be confused with weakness, that beings who help others often need strength to protect both themselves and their ability to continue helping. The countdown to sleep that dominates Jirachi's final waking hours creates urgency that could lead to desperate or careless wish granting, but observations suggest Jirachi maintains quality standards even as time runs short. Rather than rushing through remaining petitions, it often withdraws from wish activity entirely in the final days, using that time to rest and prepare for dormancy. This discipline demonstrates remarkable emotional regulation, accepting that not all wishes can be granted, rather than compromising its standards to squeeze in more attempts. The restraint teaches that sustainability matters more than exhausting oneself trying to solve every problem, that preserving capacity for future help sometimes means leaving present needs unmet. The tears that Jirachi sheds in the final moments before sleep crystallize into false eyes that adorn its body during dormancy, symbolic markers of everything it witnessed and couldn't fix during its brief consciousness. These eye-like marks create the impression of awareness even while deeply asleep, perhaps discouraging those who might otherwise disturb the cocoon. They also serve as record of Jirachi's emotional experiences, physical traces of the gratitude, sorrow, and connection that defined its waking period. When Jirachi awakens next, these false eyes dissolve, washing away the previous cycle's emotional weight so the creature can approach the new awakening fresh, rather than burdened by accumulated history. In the vastness between Jirachi's conscious periods, the world transforms in ways both subtle and dramatic. Technologies advance, languages shift, forests grow where cities stood, and cities rise where forests were. When Jirachi awakens to find everything changed, it must relearn the present world from scratch, understanding new context before it can effectively grant wishes appropriate to the current era. This constant adaptation might explain why Jirachi seems forever young, despite its incredible age. It never settles into fixed patterns or nostalgic attachment to past conditions, but treats each awakening as a new beginning, requiring fresh engagement. The flexibility this demands must be extraordinary, constantly releasing old knowledge to make room for new understanding, perpetually starting over while carrying the deep wisdom that previous cycles accumulated. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed drifting through these quiet moments, there's another video waiting on the left of your screen. Let it play while you rest. You might discover something gentle before sleep takes you again.